Everyone knows the name Mansa Musa, the Mali king who walked to Mecca with 60,000 people, who carried 18 tons of gold across the Sahara, who handed out so much wealth in Cairo that he crashed the Egyptian economy for 12 years. Historians call him the richest person in recorded history. Estimates place his net worth anywhere between $300 billion and $400 billion in today's money. Some say higher. Some say the number is simply too large to calculate, and they might be right. But they are looking in the wrong direction because before Mansa Musa, before Rome, before any empire whose name you recognize, there was a man whose wealth was so vast that the Quran itself could not describe it in numbers. His name was Qarun, and he makes Mansa Musa look like a man counting coins. Qarun was not a king, not a conqueror, not a man who inherited an empire. He was a member of Bani Israel, the people of Prophet Musa, peace be upon him. A scholar, someone who, according to classical Islamic scholarship, had memorized more of the Torah than almost anyone alive. Ibn Kathir, the 14th century Islamic scholar whose Tafsir remains one of the most referenced works in Quranic commentary, identifies Qarun as a cousin of Musa himself. Ibn Jurayj records his full lineage. Qarun bin Yashar bin Kahith, a direct relative of the Prophet who would become his greatest adversary. He started as an insider, a man of faith, a man of knowledge, a man trusted by his community, and then Allah gave him wealth. Here's the problem with comparing Qarun to Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa's wealth can be estimated. Historians argue about the numbers. $300 billion, $400 billion, possibly more. But they argue in numbers, currencies, gold weights, market values. Qarun's wealth is described in the Quran in a way that deliberately resists quantification. We gave him so many treasures that their keys alone would burden a group of strong men. Surah Al-Qasas, 28:76, not the treasure, the keys. Ibn Kathir records a narration from Al-Amash, transmitted through Kathama, describing the keys of Qarun's treasuries as each being the size of a finger, made of leather, with each key corresponding to a separate storeroom. When Qarun traveled, the keys alone required 60 mules to carry. 60 mules. Just for the keys. Scholar Sa'id ibn al-Musayyab, one of the most respected figures among the Tabi'in, the generation that followed the companions of the Prophet, stated plainly, Qarun was the wealthiest human being who ever walked the earth. Other narrations in classical tafsir place the weight of the keys at the equivalent of the load carried by 300 mules. Not the gold, not the treasuries, the keys to get to the gold. No spreadsheet in history has ever tried to calculate what lies behind 300 mules worth of keys. This is where the story becomes more than a record of ancient wealth. The Quran records that when Qarun's people urged him to be grateful, to give from what he had been given, to use his fortune in the way of Allah, he gave them an answer that sounds very familiar. I was only given it because of the knowledge I possess. Surah Al-Qasas, 28:78. This is the oldest recorded version of a claim that has never gone away. I earned this. I built this. My intelligence did this. My strategy, my skill, my genius. Imam al-Qurtubi, in his Tafsir, explains that Qarun's sin was not merely arrogance, it was a theological error. He had replaced gratitude with ownership. He had looked at what Allah gave him and concluded, this is mine, not because it was entrusted to me, but because I deserve it. Dr. Omar Suleiman, contemporary Islamic scholar and founder of the Yaqeen Institute, describes Qarun as the Quran's archetypal figure of economic tyranny, placed deliberately alongside Pharaoh, the archetype of political tyranny, and Haman, the archetype of institutional corruption. Three men, three forms of power, all destroyed in the same era. The Quran does not place these three together by accident. Classical Islamic scholarship offers details that go beyond the keys and the mules. Imam al-Qurtubi records that Qarun was distinguished among his people before his wealth. He was known as An-Nur, the light, because of the beauty of his voice when reciting the Torah. He was educated, respected, spiritually literate, and then his fortune grew. Ibn Kathir describes Qarun emerging before his people in a procession of deliberate display, dressed in the finest garments, surrounded by retinue, walking with the specific gait of a man who wanted to be watched. The scholars note that even his clothing, dragged on the ground, recorded by Shahr ibn Hawshab as a marker of arrogance so refined it had become physical, not accidental excess, intentional performance. He did not just have wealth. He used it as a language that said, "Look at what I have, look at what you do not." The Quran records two responses from the people who watched Qarun's procession. The first group felt what human beings have always felt when watching someone else live in abundance they cannot reach. Would that we had the like of what Qarun has been given. He truly has had a great fortune. Surah Al-Qasas 28:79. This is not condemned in the Quran as evil. It is recorded as human, recognizable. But the second group said something different. They said, "Woe to you! The reward of Allah for those who believe and do good is better than anything Qarun has." And only those who are patient understand this. Yaqeen Institute's published academic paper on the psychology of wealth in Islamic tradition notes that these two responses represent two different relationships with material reality, one that reads wealth as evidence of divine favor, and one that understands it as a test with no bearing on a person standing before Allah. The Quran validates both as human reactions. Then it shows what happens next. The earth opened, not metaphorically, not gradually, sudden, total, and complete. So we caused the earth to swallow him and his home. Surah Al-Qasas 28:81. Qarun, his palace, his treasuries, his keys, his 60 mules, his processions, his dragging garments, all of it gone into the earth. Ibn Kathir references a hadith recorded in Sahih Al-Bukhari, transmitted from Salim through his father, in which the Prophet, peace be upon him, described a man dragged down in arrogance, sinking and continuing to sink until the day of judgment. The punishment was calibrated to the sin. Qarun's wealth went down, Qarun went with it, and the people who had envied him stood there and said something the Quran preserved for 1400 years. Allah extends provision to whom He wills of His servants and restricts it. If Allah had not conferred His favor on us, He would have caused the earth to swallow us. Surah Al-Qasas 28:82. The people who envied him had just been saved from wanting what he had. They understood in that moment that Qarun's wealth was never really his. It was a test, and he failed it completely. Every generation produces its Qarun, not in name, in logic, the logic that says, I earned this. My intelligence built this. My strategy, my network, my vision. Not luck, not God, not circumstance, me. Mansa Musa, for all his incomprehensible wealth, made his famous pilgrimage to Mecca. He gave. He built mosques. He funded scholarship. He understood, at some level, that his wealth came from something larger than himself. Qarun understood no such thing. And this is why the Quran, a book not particularly interested in recording economic statistics, took the time to describe his keys, his mules, his processions, his clothing, his words, and his end. Not to tell you how rich he was, to show you what wealth does when it is cut off from its source. Mansa Musa's gold eventually ran out. Empires always do. Qarun's treasuries are still in the earth, and according to the Quran, he is still sinking,